Well, I want to talk about something that I've never discussed before, and it's the real climate emergency. We've heard a lot in the media recently about how we're all going to burn or we're all going to drown, and that there's this great disaster approaching humanity because we're all driving our cars too much, going on foreign holidays, and eating too much steak and drinking too much milk. But there is a real climate change emergency. And that climate change emergency is being caused by the fanatics, and they are fanatics, the extremists. And you know, in my videos, I always make it very, very clear that I am absolutely opposed to extremism. The problem that we've got is that the extremists and the lunatics really have taken over the asylum. When we think about Greta, doesn't Greta grate on you? Greta Thunberg, the high priestess of the green movement, the green goblin, the green gobliness from Scandinavia, where I don't know where she comes from. She just comes from somewhere north of the wall. She just came from the north a few years ago and sulked her way into the Houses of Parliament, at which point we had the great and the good bowing down to her and worshipping the green goddess, Greta Thunberg. Now, she gets a disproportionate amount of coverage. She's probably the most talked about Scandinavian teenager on the planet. As far as I know, she's never been to school. She's never had a job. And yet she's able to come and lecture the United Kingdom about what we should do regarding climate change. Of course, she never goes and lectures China. I don't think she's ever been to China to address the Politburo of the Communist Party or the dictator-in-chief of the Communist Party in China and tell him to stop building coal-fired power stations. But the real problem with the climate emergency, the climate change emergency, is not Greta Thunberg, not the 50,000 communists, not just communists. Black Lives Matter, at the protest in Glasgow yesterday, there were Black Lives Matter flags. We know what Black Lives Matter is. It's a communist organisation that wants to overthrow the state, overthrow the police, destroy capitalism, destroy the nuclear family. Black Lives Matter does not really care about black lives, because if it did, it would be protesting about the genocide that's taking place in Nigeria against black African Christians and animists by half-Arab Muslim fanatics. That's another story, and that's for another video. But Black Lives Matter were there. Apparently the Palestinians were there. There was Palestinian flags. So people from the Gaza Strip, Hamas, must have jetted in for this protest yesterday in Glasgow. And of course there was the usual suspects, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Communist Party. And what did the banner say at the front of the march? Extinguish capitalism. Capitalism extinction. So we're not just talking about Greta. We're talking about all the usual suspects, all the people that hate the United Kingdom, that hate the West, that hate Western civilization and everything about it. And incidentally, they also hate Israel and the Jewish people as well. They were there in numbers at the march yesterday. In fact, they seem to make up the greatest numbers. But they're not the worrying people. The worrying people are the people that were sitting in that great assembly of the corrupt, the hypocritical, the downright evil, the globalist elite. And what do the globalist elite want from this? Well, they want to destroy the poor. The globalist elite want to stop development in the third world. People think that the migrant crisis is bad now. If this globalist elite get away with what they're trying to get away with, they want to stop development, industrial development in Africa. Solar panels and windmills are not going to power Africa into the 21st century and into first world development. The only thing that's going to do that is fossil fuels. They're not going to do it with wind power. They can't afford nuclear power. The only way that Africa can develop is using fossil fuels. And of course, Africa has an abundance of oil and gas. And they could build gas-fired power stations that are far more less damaging to the environment than the Chinese coal-fired power stations that are merrily pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But this isn't what it's about. What this is about the elite. Boris Johnson, Prince Charles, and this is for another video. Prince Charles, almost you're persuading me to become a Republican, Prince Charles. Almost you're persuading me that the monarchy in the United Kingdom is not fit for purpose. How dare you come and lecture the people who have given your family so much support down through the years about where we go on holiday, about what cars we drive, about how we heat our homes. So these policies, this net zero nonsense that has been pushed upon us by Boris and Biden and Trudeau and all the usual suspects, all the liberal global elite that are lecturing us, flying in their private jets, bringing their cavalcade of cars and their bodyguards and everything else that goes with their entourage. They then lecture us about how we've got to live in penury, because not only does it destroy African development and Indian development, and of course China are going to do what the heck they want. China are going to continue to build coal-fired power stations. Who's going to stop them? You're going to stop them, Joe? You couldn't even sort Afghanistan out. You're certainly not going to stop China developing and building coal-powered power stations. Of course you're not. But what they will do, they're going to tax and destroy the middle class. They're going to tax and destroy the working class in the West. They're going to make sure that we are bowing and scraping and living in poverty. And like that globalist said, I can't remember the fellow's name, Klaus or other, you will have nothing and you will be happy. Really? Really? Is that what makes people happy? Having no job? Having no money? Having to have their hand out to the state like everybody did during the pandemic? These people have a plan to drive Western civilization off a cliff. And Boris Johnson is not what he seems. What did Boris Johnson say in a tweet? He's coming after your car, he's coming after your cash, and he's coming after your coal. Boris is saying it quite openly. And of course, the tragedy of this is that there are solutions. If climate change is real, let's give them that. Let's say the climate scientists are right and climate change is real. I don't know about the science. I'm not a scientist. Let's say it's real. There are plenty of other ways to mitigate climate change. But what the global elite are trying to do, they're trying to take your car off you. They're trying to take your heating off you. They're trying to stop you eating meat. It's the next one. They're going to be slaughtering all the cows for farting too much and belching too much. So you'll have no meat and you'll have no milk. And this is not fantasy. This is what they intend to do. And people need to start taking to the streets. All these lunatics, these extremists can take to the streets and shout about a climate emergency. Of course, when they're all starving to death, when they don't have any heat and they don't have any way of getting electricity to power up their mobile phones and to power up their laptops, well, they'll be the first ones squealing and crying. This government, this so-called conservative government, is quite happy to drive our economy off the cliff. The UK produces 1% of carbon emissions now. 1%. But Boris Johnson is quite happy to stop industrial development in the UK because when energy becomes too expensive, when it becomes too expensive to manufacture products in the UK, everything will be outsourced and we will create nothing and we will not be happy, Klaus Schwab. We will not be happy. Interesting thing about increasing carbon dioxide. Did you know that increasing carbon dioxide acts as a fertilizer and leads to global greening? In other words, more crops grow, more vegetation grows. Not a lot of people know that because not a lot of people have read anything about climate change. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert because I know so little. I'm not going to say whether climate change is real or not because I just don't know about the science. But I know that that's one fact, that carbon dioxide is a fertilizer. Plants take in carbon dioxide, they pump out oxygen, it makes plants grow. That's what happens. Did you know that when there was a great run towards biofuel, do you know that plunged many people in the third world into food poverty and people starved to death? Because agricultural land that was meant to be used for growing crops was used to grow crops that were used for biofuel. Again, not a lot of people know that. And the reality is that these so-called do-gooders who say they're going to save the planet are quite happy to plunge the poor South into even greater poverty, which will lead to an even greater migrant crisis. And I have a great fondness for Africa and people who live in Africa. I spent quite some time in West Africa trying to help the poor in West Africa and try to help them build their own economies and build their own communities. And I don't want to see these elites, these imperialists, these colonialists, like Boris Johnson, Joe Biden and Trudeau, starving fellow human beings who live south of the equator and denying them the industrial revolution that has pulled every single person in Western civilization out of poverty. The climate change fanatics are not just deluded, they are immoral and they are wicked. And their policies are wicked, and their policies are going to lead to disaster, certainly in the United Kingdom and almost certainly in Africa. And I just hope the Indians and the Chinese have enough sense to ignore them and carry on merrily doing what they're doing and industrializing their nations. Because when a nation industrializes, you get technological breakthroughs which solve a lot of these problems that the prophets of doom are talking about. My opinion, the climate change fanatics are part of a messianic cult. Boris Johnson talks about the clock being 1 minute close to midnight, the doomsday clock. Well, there is a doomsday clock, and it's to do with nuclear weapons, and it's been at 1 minute to midnight for as long as I've been alive. And that's a far bigger threat to humanity than climate change. Nuclear annihilation is a very real, genuine threat to humanity. And nuclear proliferation is one of the most wicked maladies that affects the human race. But that's not trendy anymore. Nobody talks about that anymore. That Pakistan, China, North Korea, probably Iran and other despotic states, if they don't have nuclear weapons, they're very close to acquiring them. Far bigger issue than climate change, Boris. There's far more issues back at home than climate change as well. How about sealing your borders and stopping this invasion of young fighting age men coming across the channel? Anyway, enough said. That's my first shot on climate change. I will see you all soon, and no doubt I'll be talking about this more and more. Thanks for watching.